in the heart of South Carolina, in a small segregated mill town called Alcaloo. A boy once lived who never had the chance to grow up. His name was George Junius Stinney Jr. He was only 14 years old, small for his age, thin, shy, and full of quiet dreams. But in 1944, in a world divided by race and fear, George became the youngest person to be executed in the United States in the 20th century. This is his story of injustice and innocence, and of a country forced, decades later, to face its own reflection in the mirror of history. It was a humid afternoon in March 1944. The air in Alcaloo was still. This was a town where everyone knew everyone, but not everyone was treated the same. The black families lived on one side of the railroad tracks. The white families lived on the other. The tracks didn't just divide the town, they divided opportunity, safety, and justice itself. George lived in a small company house with his parents and siblings. His father worked at the local sawmill. Life was simple, hard, but peaceful. Then came that fateful day. Two white girls, Betty June Binnicker, aged 11, and Mary Emma Thames, just 8, were riding their bicycles near the black part of town. They are looking for a certain kind of flower, the maypop blossom, a passion flower that grew wild in the fields. They stopped to ask George and his little sister Anne if they knew where to find any. It was a short, innocent conversation, and then the girls rode off down the dirt road. That would be the last time they were seen alive. When the girls didn't return home that evening, a search party began. Dozens of townspeople combed the area, carrying lanterns and calling their names into the dark. The next morning, the girls' bodies were found in a shallow ditch, bruised and lifeless. The news spread faster than truth could travel. And in a town already poisoned by racism, whispers turned into accusations. Someone said George had seen the girls that day. That alone was enough. Without warning, police arrived at the Stinney home. They arrested George and his brother while their parents were away. His little sister, terrified, watched as officers took her brothers away in handcuffs. George was questioned alone in a locked room, no lawyer, no parents, no witnesses. 4 hours, the boy was grilled by grown men who already believed he was guilty. Later, they claimed he had confessed, but there was no written confession, no signature, no recording. Just their word against a 14-year-old black boy who barely weighed 90 pounds. When word spread that George had confessed, the town exploded in anger. A mob formed outside the jail, demanding vengeance. The police quickly moved George to another county, fearing he would be lynched before any trial could even begin. Days later, he was indicted for murder. The trial was set just weeks after the girls' deaths. In that courtroom, no one was there for George. His parents had been forced to flee town for their own safety. His court-appointed attorney was a tax lawyer with no criminal defense experience, and he didn't call a single witness, not one. The trial lasted barely 2 hours. The all-white jury deliberated for 10 minutes. And just like that, George Stinney Jr. was sentenced to death by electric chair. He didn't understand what was happening. Witnesses later said he didn't even seem to realize he'd been sentenced to die. He asked if he could have ice cream after the trial. He was 14. As the weeks passed, his family begged for mercy. Civil rights groups were silent. Fear was everywhere. Governor Olin Johnston received letters from citizens across the country pleading for a stay-off execution, but he refused. He claimed there was no reason to delay justice. On June 16, 1944, George Stinney Jr. was led into the execution chamber at the South Carolina State Penitentiary. He was so small that the electric chair had to be modified. George requested for a Bible and he held it to claim his innocency. He cried, and they used the Bible under his foot, making him tall enough for the electrodes to reach his head. When the hood was placed over his face, it slipped off because the mask was too big. Moments later, a current of 2,400 volts surged through his body, and the life of a 14-year-old boy ended. a boy whose only crime was being black in the wrong place and time was gone. But the story of George Stinney didn't end that day. For decades, the truth would hide in shadows buried under lies, fear and silence, until one day, 70 years later, the world would finally hear his name again. After George Stinney's execution, silence swept through the town of Alcaloo. People stopped talking about it. Newspapers printed short articles, repeating the same story 14-year-old murderer executed. And then the world moved on. But for George's family, time froze that day in June 1944. His mother, who had been forced to flee with her children, never saw her son again. His siblings carried the weight of that memory for the rest of their lives, not only the pain of losing him, but the knowledge that no one believed their brother was innocent. For decades, the Stinney family lived in quiet grief. They rarely spoke of George's death, not out of shame, but out of fear. In the Jim Crow South, even speaking the truth could bring danger. And so George's story became one of thousands buried under the dust of history, locked away in old court files and forgotten archives. Yet, deep down, those who knew him, who remembered his gentle nature, his shy smile, refused to let the truth die completely. As years turned into decades, America began to change. The civil rights movement rose. Voices that had once been silenced grew louder, demanding justice, equality, and the right to be heard. But for the Stinney family, justice still felt unreachable. How could they fight a verdict delivered by a world that no longer even remembered? There were no surviving court transcripts, no defense records, no signed confession, only a few yellowed newspaper clippings and memories that refused to fade. Yet in that darkness, a spark remained. In the early 2000s, historians and local activists began revisiting forgotten cases of racial injustice from the Jim Crow era. Among them, the name George Stinney Jr. resurfaced, whispered first, then spoken louder until it reached national attention. Lawyers, journalists, and filmmakers began searching for what really happened. And what they found painted a very different picture of that day in 1944. First, the so-called confession. No one ever saw it. Not a single person outside law enforcement could confirm its existence. George couldn't read or write well, and yet police claimed he had. Not only confessed, but given detailed descriptions of the crime. Impossible details that only the killer could know. But when asked to produce that confession, they had nothing. Not a paper, not a recording, just words. And words in 1944 South Carolina were enough to kill a boy. Then came the evidence, or rather, the lack of it. No murder weapon was ever recovered. No fingerprints, no bloodstains, no physical link to George at all. His lawyer never challenged the prosecution. He never questioned the police. He never called a single witness, not even George's sister Aim, who could have testified that she was with him when the girls rode by. That one fact alone might have saved his life. It became clear, George Stinney wasn't convicted because of evidence. He was convicted because of who he was, a poor black child in a white town, in a nation where the color of your skin could decide whether you lived or died. In the years that followed, Alcaloo changed. The sawmill shut down. The town grew quieter. But some residents, now elderly, remembered that day, and their memories began to challenge the old story. One woman, who was a child herself back then, later recalled that George was at home when the girls went missing. She remembered him tending to his family's cow with his sister nowhere near the ditch, where the bodies were found. Others remembered how quickly the police had made up their minds, how the white townspeople were demanding someone to blame, and how the authorities found their answer in the first black boy they could find. The deeper people looked, the more the truth unraveled. It wasn't just about George anymore. It was about a system that had failed an entire generation that allowed children to be tried, convicted, and executed in a matter of days. It was about the hundreds of black men and boys who faced similar fates, their names lost to time. their stories untold. George Stinney's case became a symbol and name that historians, activists, and artists began to speak of whenever they talked about America's dark past. In 2013, almost 70 years after his death, something extraordinary happened. A new generation of lawyers in South Carolina decided to take up George's case. They petitioned the court to reopen it not for revenge, but for truth. The motion was simple: to clear the name of George Stinney Jr., to finally say what should have been said in 1944, that this boy was denied justice. It wasn't an easy process. The old files were nearly gone. Many witnesses were dead. But George's surviving siblings, now elderly, came forward, their voices trembling but firm. They spoke of that day of the arrest, of the fear that gripped their family. They described how they were forced to leave their home, how their mother cried for years after George's death, and how silence became their only protection. Their words, after 7 decades, finally echoed in a courtroom that once silenced them. In December 2014, Circuit Judge Carmen Mullen delivered a decision that would change history. She vacated George Stinney's conviction, declaring that his trial had been a fundamental injustice. She called the process that condemned him so lacking in due process as to be legally void. For the first time, the state of South Carolina admitted what had long been known, that George never received a fair trial, that his rights had been trampled, and that the system had failed him completely. The courtroom that day was silent as the words were read aloud. Tears flowed from George's family members, tears of both sorrow and relief. They knew nothing could bring him back. But at last, the world knew the truth. It had taken 70 years. But George Stinney Jr. was no longer a murderer in the eyes of the law. He was finally innocent. When Judge Carmen Mullen cleared George Stinney's name in 2014, it was more than just a legal correction, it was a moral awakening. A message whispered across decades that even after 70 years, truth still matters. But what George's story revealed went far beyond one boy, one town, or one trial. It revealed the reflection of a nation, wrestling with its conscience, a country that had built its foundations on freedom, yet for centuries denied it to millions. To understand George's story fully, we must understand the America he lived in. In 1944, the United States was fighting in World War II a war against tyranny, racism, and injustice abroad. But back home, in the Deep South, a different kind of war was still being fought, a war of segregation, fear, and hatred. African Americans could fight for their country, but they couldn't sit at the same table as a white man. They could wear a uniform, but not equality. And for a child like George, even innocence couldn't protect him from the color of his skin. In the 1940s, executions in America were not rare. But to execute a child, especially one barely in his teens, was extraordinary. George Stinney became the youngest person executed in the country in more than a century. His death sent a quiet chill across the nation, but it faded fast, swallowed by war headlines and racial silence. Time has a way of revealing truth no matter how deeply it's buried. And for George Stinney Jr., truth took 70 long years to rise from silence. But when it finally did, it came not with anger, not with vengeance, but with the quiet dignity of justice long denied. Today, when we say George's name, we don't just speak of a boy from South Carolina. We speak of every child who was ever silenced, every person who was ever judged not by their actions, but by their skin. We speak of history, the kind that hurts to remember, but must never be forgotten, because forgetting is how it happens again. The story of George Stinney Jr. reminds us that injustice doesn't always wear a mask of hatred. Sometimes it wears the face of law, the face of silence, the face of those who looked away. In that tiny courtroom in 1944, an entire system failed a child. It failed his family. It failed humanity itself. Let George's story be more than history. Let it be a lesson, a warning, a call to empathy. Because when we remember him, when we say his name, we take one small step closer to a world where no child, anywhere, ever faces what he did. This is not just the story of a boy. It's the story of a nation, a mirror held to time, and a question that still echoes through history.